in a way was kind of tribe-like. I know the street that I grew up on, it was my grandmother's house that was next door to my great-grandmother's house, and at one point in time, me and my mama lived in my great-grandmother's house after she passed away. So, you know, there's just everything is now spread out, and at least for me, there's like not that unifying factor that there was.
The people here are still in rebuild mode, despite what you see on TV for the masses of the people. The Big Easy is not easy.
Not to mention the fact that almost 80% of the city is living in poverty, mostly the black folks.
You shut down the mental facilities when people needed them the most. You shut down our hospitals. You tore down the projects when people that were perfectly good structures where people had no place to live. Like, you made it very clear you're unwanted, uncared about. In fact, we just wish you would just go away and die.
Growing up in the Magnolia projects, I mean, it was a sense of community. Like the neighborhood kids, if you were doing something wrong, they'll kind of like, the big dogs would kind of like snatch you up and be like, look, you better get your head together, or they'll tell your grandma or your mom on you. After the storm, it's like nah, it's like people don't care. Well, that ain't my child. I don't care. Before the storm, like, kids were fighting. After the storm, a whole nother level. It's gunplay.
I did time on death row. I've been in prison. I've been in riots. I've been in quite a few shootouts. Nothing prepared me to the aftermath of Katrina. Nothing.
When you come to modernize the city after the disaster, you have to look at people like Friedman out of Chicago. They developed a economic policy, and that economic policy is facilitated by what is known in certain circles as disaster capitalism. That is, whenever there's a major event that disrupts the established order, then people can come in and make tremendous change, which could not have been made without that major disaster. And that's what happened in New Orleans.
We've done a lot of good, but there are still people right now who are suffering because of the policies, procedures, and programs that were put in place that were supposed to help people, but they ended up making it harder for people to rebuild their lives.
I got a call from my supervisor who said, Melinda, you can now return to work. That was in October, but there's no housing available. We don't know where you will be housed. And my response was, okay, I need to make some decisions. because I had no place to go. So my choice eventually, within, I'll say several weeks or so thereafter, I decided to retire.
And so you decided to not attempt to move back
No,
to
I did
Memphis
not.
because
If it had not been for Katrina, I would not be in Texas. Katrina opened my eyes that no matter how much you legislate, no matter how much your policies are there is still this class difference, there's still this race difference, there's still all of these other differences.
It's been documented. There are over 100,000, hear me correctly, over 100,000 black people who were residents of New Orleans before the storm who have not been able to return to New Orleans. However, the population is approaching what it was before the storm. That meant when you remove 100,000 black people from the equation, in order to approach equality, I mean, somebody else came in and took their place.
My neighborhood was one that was recommended not to return by the Bring Back New Orleans Commission that was founded by the mayor at the time, Mayor Nagin. So my neighborhood, along with 7 others, were recommended not to return. We learned about that waking up, reading our local newspaper, the Times-Picayune, with green dots.
The tragedy of the story of Katrina is that we did have billions of dollars that could have been used for counseling and therapy. Every school should have had therapeutic environments. They should have been met with like love and a concentration of just like art and music and things to soothe.
Policies and procedures that were accepted or approved at not only the federal level, which was drastic. The disaster was privatized in terms of the response. You had billions of dollars being directed to 5 or 6 corporations to manage the recovery of our city.
For instance, where we are now technically was not considered a flood zone, so we did not have flood insurance. However, we had a little over 2 feet of water that's still flooding. So all of our floors, and this is a very big building, all of our floors had to be replaced. The electrical wiring that was below a certain level and all of the sheetrock, up until that point, had to be pulled out and stuff. So those were factors that we had and expenses that we had, but we did not have the insurance to cover it.
1% of the resources went to rental housing, which our community pre-Katrina was a majority renter communities. But only 1% of those resources went to put these homes back into commerce. And rents are sky high. The level of affordability is not there. The markets have risen anywhere. My neighborhood of Broadmoor up 96%. I have other communities in my district not up 143%, up 146%. So the level of affordability is just not there.
I was born and partially raised in Mid-City, and that was always, in New Orleans, diversity, it changes from neighborhood to neighborhood. So you can have a neighborhood that's, all black, and then 3 blocks down you have higher property values, and it's a little more diverse. So Mid-City in some areas were a lot more diverse, but once I got to senior high school, I moved to New Orleans East, and it was mainly more predominantly black. And so I traveled back to Mid-City because that's where I would like to, live, because that's where I grew up. But I've kind of been priced out of that neighborhood.
Crime was on the rise before Katrina. but it has increased even more so now because of the economy and the level of joblessness. And I think people don't feel what I see and hear now from my friends and family who are still there. They don't feel worthwhile.
Back then they had you had the third wall here, the sixth wall here. Right. After the storm, it was like St. Potomac. That's like, whoa.
They didn't deal with that. They didn't deal with the fact that when they gave us them bunk Section 8 certificates and told us to leave, that we would rather come back and live in the project. You know, open up, or just give us back our community. Because that's what they looked at it, as a project. But we look at it as a long-standing community. And nobody look at the ramification of it until now.
You just started so many wars within a community. You have the Ibernoia, my hood in Iberville, just like they running for a minute, and next know you just like chaos kick off.
They're building a new prison. They shut down all the projects and move people in with each other, and it's causing territorial warfare. The new prison about to open up soon. They want somebody in it, obviously. You know what I'm saying? And they have task force on the street already, specifically focusing on gang violence or you know what I'm saying, that type of thing.
People are going to say progress. People are going to say recovery. What's actually happened in New Orleans post-Katrina is change. Wholesale change that I believe has left a certain segment of the community behind. One of the areas I think where the biggest change has been in education.
Prior to Katrina, there was an elected school board that ran the entire district. There were maybe one or two, less than 5 schools that were under the control of the state in the 2004-2005 school year.
I found that before Katrina, my school was primarily filled with students that were from that particular area. So most of the students I went to school with, I knew them from the neighborhood. Our parents knew each other. Our parents probably had went to high school together. And then I think kind of fast forward after Katrina, the tone, the culture of the city changed just a bit, I think.
There are series of state legislation that was rewritten. Act 35 is one of the more kind of famous ones. So Act 35 changed the cutoff score and expanded the number of schools that the state was able to take over as a result. Before the storm, charter schools could only open if it was kind of the interest and the interest of parents and teachers who had come together to put together, parents, teachers, and community members who put a proposal together for a charter school. After Katrina, the law allowed anyone to come and start a charter school, so it didn't have to come from the community.
It's become a national story. It's supposedly a national model. We are the only city in the country that has an all-charter school district. You hear the narrative. It's a well-crafted, well-publicized narrative over and over again about the success of the post-Katrina education reforms in New Orleans. That really hasn't been the case.
Most of the schools now in the city are run by private boards. You leave the governance and you leave the quality of the school, you leave the culture of the school up to other people to determine, and I think that's fundamentally a problem.
We had $2 billion set aside for schools in New Orleans, and we have schools constantly being closed down and not reopened, and we have schools like McMahon where the roof is falling in, but we had $2 billion allotted for schools.
At that time, 2005, go back in your memory bank, America was in a recession. The business community was trying to figure out how we gonna make money. They look around the country and they see the largest single pot of money that's untouched, untapped, they would say, in a systemic way, is in public education. Because everywhere in the country, public education fell under the governance, the local, state, and regional governance, right? So if you want to get access to that money, you got to privatize.
What do you feel like residents can do, or I guess native New Orleanians can do to try to, I guess, shift or control the way that the recovery happens?
Capitalism has this philosophy of infinite progression. It's always growing, right? Never stops, never rests, never contracts. In life, everything goes through a life cycle. They want you to philosophically believe that capitalism never ends. It's not true. Our people, primarily poor and disenfranchised in this city, there is nothing short of organized resistance that they can do to change this.
I think from a government's perspective that we have to do a better job at determining the needs of our people on the ground that cannot be punitive.
So, we just find ourselves at a crossroads right now of trying to figure out where do we go from here, How do we continue to sustain ourselves?
You're not going to see anything happen for you, your community, if you just sit back and allow these powers to come in and do what they've been doing. So to continue to fight wherever and whenever you can.
Piece by piece, we're going to continue to organize young folk. We're going to continue to mobilize around these issues, bring awareness to these issues. We want to partner with our older people who know about the economic aspect of it, not just how it's manifested on an individual personal level. How does discrimination and racism in New Orleans make me feel? But on an economic level, how can we look at this? And then we need to meet up. We need to figure out how can we put this information together? How can we go forth? How can we present it? And what actions do we need to take to make the New Orleans that we know, that we love, that we grew up in? How do we bring that back here? Because it's here, it's not left, it's just dispersed.
4, 3, 2, 1. Katrina all day, baby. You heard me? They ain't took us nowhere. We still out here grinding, still out here working, still doing our thing. They can't get rid of us. You heard me? All day, every day. New Orleans, you feel me?